What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and welcome back, guys, to another tier list. Let's get it. We're back. Season 1 has reinvigorated my love for Doctor Who. Just kidding, guys. It was never gone. And today, guys, we're going to be talking about something which I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time. Doctor Who cliffhangers. We all love them. We all know them. And today, guys, I'm going to be ranking them all. Just a few ground rules just before we get into the video. I'm going to be going over every single cliffhanger in the modern era of the show, aka from 2005 onwards. If you want me to do a video ranking every single cliffhanger of every single story in Doctor Who ever, which there are a lot of them, leave a comment below. And also don't forget to leave a like and subscribe too. But yes, I'm being quite loose with the term cliffhanger here. As you might see, I am including episodes like Doomsday, which feature the cliffhanger into The Runaway Bride, where Donna shows up and it's like, what? You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm including everything, not just one-parters, not just two-parters. But I have been a little picky. Like, for example, I am not including the end of Parting of the Ways, where Christopher Eccleston regenerates into David Tennant, and then David Tennant says Barcelona, mostly because I don't think that counts. Do you guys think that counts? Basically, I'm making it up as we go along. And yes, before you ask, everyone, the community reaction is releasing shortly, and it is a doozy. You do not want to miss that one. I have actually picked out more comments for that video than I ever have on a video before. It is going to be absolutely crazy. I'm going to be talking about the negatives, the positives, the people in between. I'm going to be going over everything. It's going to be a mammoth behemoth of a video, but let's live in the here and now and let's talk about Doctor Who cliffhangers. Play the intro. Psych! I told you guys, I can't be doing that stuff no more. But let's look at it. These are all of the episodes that we're going to rank today, from Aliens of London to Wild Blue Yonder. Now, technically, I could wait till the last week of the season to rank one extra episode, because if you guys don't know, slight spoiler alert, there's only going to be one cliffhanger in the next series. So technically, I could wait. CVA, man. I'm going to be going up to Wild Blue Yonder, and I'm going to be describing all of them, and I'm going to be ranking them on a scale of S tier to F tier. And yes, keen-eyed audience members will be noticing that the illustrious E tier is in the mix once again. Are we actually going to use it this time? Probably not. Let's start with Aliens of London, the first ever modern cliffhanger in Doctor Who. Unless you count Rose for some reason. Do we count that one? Fuck it, guys. We're just starting with Aliens of London. This is an iconic cliffhanger. With the discussion surrounding space babies and the fart humor in the episode, I am instantly brought back to when the Slitheen were one of the most controversial parts of Doctor Who. It might seem like playtime nowadays, but trust me, kids, people fucking hated these things. Russell T Davies brought back Doctor Who and he's turned it into a laughing stock. Farts in Doctor Who? Not my Doctor Who. I can still hear it now. But I'll say what I've always said, which is that this episode is a fucking banger, and this cliffhanger is too. Oh my god. I love the soundtrack, I love the effects, I love the laughter, and I love the delivery of the line, "We are the Slitheen." It's such a great voice effect, and the of the eyes, oh my god. I feel like I could break down every single part of this scene. I love the police officer coming into Jackie's apartment. It's a great way to build the world, and also I imagine that that's terrifying to a young child, because, you know, police, they're meant to be good guys. It's also a great bit of social messaging, having the police and the politicians be the disgusting alien monsters. I don't know if they'll be able to get away with it today. W social commentary, Russell T Davies. As always, my king. But yeah, I just adore this one. I love the line, "Thank you all for wearing your ID cards. It will help us to identify the bodies," and then and everyone's dying. And I also love how they replay the cliffhanger at the start of the next episode, and then we just continue on straight from there. Guys, I really love this episode. You can say it's nostalgia, you can say it's bias. I don't care. I'm gonna put this one in A tier. I'm very tempted to put it in S tier, guys. You don't even know. In fact, how about this? At the end of the video, I'll reassess the whole list and I'll fix anything up that needs to be changed. And maybe this one will go up to S tier. But moving swiftly on, let's talk about the empty child. Now it's weird because which part do you want to consider the start of the cliffhanger? Do you want to consider Dr. Constantine's transformation, which is probably the highlight of that episode? Do you want to count that in the cliffhanger? Because if so, I feel like the lowest this can go is B tier. And then also you have the empty child coming into the house, which I do think is rather terrifying, even if the POV shots with the fisheye lens have always been a little silly to me. I love the thing that clashes together, that old toy, you know what I'm talking about, the monkey. All the patients waking up and go, mommy, mommy, mommy. It is definitely a great cliffhanger, but you know what? I just said at the end I'm going to reassess it. But how about this? I'll put Aliens of London in S tier and I'll put The Empty Child in A tier, because Aliens of London, that one is just outstanding. Now that's just an incredible cliffhanger. And this one is really good. The cliffhanger to this episode is really good, but I don't think it meets that level. Therefore, I think that it should be a tier separate, but also I can't put this any lower than A tier. No way, man. Bad Wolf. Now, if you guys know me, you know that I really like this one. In fact, I would say it might be in my top 2 episodes of New Who ever, with Dalek being number 1. It's definitely up there. In my opinion, this episode is a masterpiece from beginning to end in terms of structure, mystery, intrigue. The soundtrack in this episode is haunting. It is so good, and I want to avoid ranting or should I say raving about how much I love this story, because I want to save that for another video. You guys know how it is. If you get me started on Doctor Who, I will straight up never ever stop, especially if it's an episode I love, and this is an episode that I love, and the cliffhanger is no different. I don't even know. Can words describe how exciting it is? It really is just an exhilarating cliffhanger. The music, the declaration of the Doctor saying no, the reaction to the ship zooming out, the theme playing, everything up to that moment is basically a perfect story. Do I say it's a perfect story? Hell yeah. I'm gonna say it is a perfect story, and that cliffhanger is perfection. S tier. Honestly, I should probably make a Z tier, but I'm not going to. I've already messed with the tiers enough, people. And from that, let's move on to series 2, to an episode which I'm not the most fond of. Despite its badass sounding name, Rise of the Cybermen is an episode which I am not too fond of. I've gone over in the past before my issues with the Cybersmen, lack of development towards the parallel world, John Lumick being a very boring derivative and uninteresting character that's basically just a complete rip-off of Davros and only saved by a good performance. And I use the word saved lightly because the character is just terrible. I don't really enjoy the world we find ourselves in. It's very uncomfortable. It's not very well thought out, and also it doesn't help that at the end of Age of Steel, which by the way I will freely admit that both of those episode titles are cool as fuck, but as episodes I don't think they're that good. And the ending of Age of Steel, I mean, people, they complain about the ending of The Devil's Cord. Have you guys watched this episode? The Doctor gets a text, right? He gets a text from Mickey, and for some reason the Doctor's not just being killed. Like, he's taken to the command center of the Cybermen for no reason, and then he gets a text and then he plugs the phone in. They just let him do this, and then it's a string of numbers that undoes the Cyberman's emotional chip, and then that kills all the Cybermen. What the fuck? Random bullshit go. This episode is so unserious, but I will say the cliffhanger is pretty good, man. The repeating of delete is very lame. I've never been a fan of the delete, the really slow Cybermen, really ugly Cybermen. Oh my god, they look fucking awful. Russell T Davies very clearly loves the Daleks. I love the Daleks as well. I love Russell T Davies. I think Russell T Davies' Dalek stories are fucking peak, but you can very much tell that he doesn't really care for the Cybermen, in the same way that Stephen Moffat very obviously doesn't care for the Daleks, because he basically just has the Cybermen act kind of like Daleks. There are a few cool things in this episode. I'm not going to say that there aren't. I do really like the imagery of the Doctor staring out of the foggy window and the Cybermen coming forward. In fact, that's probably the highlight of the whole story, which is the bit that I'm ranking. I also like that that guy from Red Dwarf says, "What if we refuse?" and then he gets killed. That's cool. The escape from the house is a really nice set piece and definitely the highlight of the episode, and it is the part that I'm ranking. I like the imagery here, I like the dialogue here, I like the action here, I like the soundtrack here. I might not like the episode, but this is a cool ass cliffhanger, so I'm gonna put it in A tier. and you guys can never call me biased again. I'm just consistent, guys. When it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's bad. I'ma just call it honestly. It's mostly good though. Speaking of mostly good, let's talk about The Impossible Planet. This cliffhanger. Mwah. My only real complaint, and this is the tiniest of nitpicks, but it's impossible not to notice, is that the muzzle flashes of the guns in this episode are very silly. Outside of that, this cliffhanger is perfect. Do you see what I did there? I started at the bottom as if to imply that maybe I wasn't gonna like it. Suckers, I fucking love this one. That's what we call tension. And now it's all deflated. This cliffhanger goes in A tier. The shot of the Doctor looking over as the pit opens with the laughter, which blends in perfectly into the soundtrack. The ood moving forward, the legions of the beast. Truly terrifying stuff. And also just the mystery of Crop Tour as well. Like, it looks really good. I still think it looks good. And the pit as well, when it opens, it's like, oh, this thing should not open. And the dialogue as well, also good. I mean, it's just a great cliffhanger. Yeah, I am glad that I put these in S tier, because while these are all very good and I would not want to put them in B tier, they aren't quite on the level of perfect as these two are. These are all really good though. Don't get it twisted. But the reason I bring that up is because we now have one that just has to go in a step above. I mean, if you guys have watched this episode, if you guys have watched this series, you know what I'm talking about. This is like the hypest shit ever. You got Cybermen, you got Daleks, you got Ricky. Literally, what is not to love? The soundtrack here is incredible. I mean, I am a little biased. I really love this episode. Every time I go back and watch, this is one of those episodes which I literally have watched maybe 1,000 times. And I think every single part of the story is good. There are only like a few really small problems, and they're so small I don't even care to mention them, because why even bother? Why bring it down? This is an S tier episode and it's an S tier cliffhanger. There's just too much. Where do I even start? The Cybermen coming out, the Cybermen taking over Torchwood, the soundtrack that's playing, all of the ghosts being turned to Cybermen. You switch to the real life, that family in that home when the Cybermen burst down the door, and the Cybermen's at the top of the stairs as well. Oh, so good. The news anchor, that guy is like, it's all perfectly fine. And then the Cybermen shows, and then we're back at Canary Wharf. The Doctor, he's staring into that bright light as all the Cybermen come through, and then he looks over and it says, sphere activated. Sphere activated. Oh my god. See, this is the type of thing that you notice when you watch Doctor Who as much as I do. But the key to a really badass scene is that you've got to have a computer automated voice saying stuff like online, offline, activated, sphere activated, deadlock seal, oxygen level at 54%. You just gotta have that stuff in there. It's a thing that seals the deal. And then we go down to the basement and oh my goodness, what a reveal. The brilliant soundtrack, the Daleks flying down, the screaming, the dialogue. That's not Cybermen. Oh my fucking god. I'm about to get really nerdy here, guys. I was reading the script to this episode. Yeah, that's me. I've gone beyond the point of just rewatching the episodes. I now reread the scripts for enjoyment purposes. I was reading the script for this episode and the script made me hype. That's how good it is. Anything below S tier would be a war crime. So let's move on to part 2, Doomsday. Now, Doomsday here is a lot less of a build-up for cliffhanger. It's a much more abrupt cliffhanger into the runaway bride. And the main thing that I have to keep in mind here, the main decision I have to make, is which version of the scene do I include? The scene at the end of Doomsday or the reshot version for series 3? Now, the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people ask me why I call series 2 so ugly. Because I do. I've called it ugly many times before. I think the visual style is not only a step down from series 1, but noticeably really ugly. And people call out the Jodie Whittaker TARDIS for being too dark. Guys, have you seen the Series 2 TARDIS? It's like a disgusting green light and nothing else. The Series 1 TARDIS was like this sometimes in a few episodes, but most of the time, the TARDIS was fine. What it looks like is, you know at the end of Boomtown when all the lights go out in the TARDIS? That's what the TARDIS looks like in Series 2 all the time. Like, this is an inhospitable environment. This is just a dark, uninviting TARDIS. That's what the Series 2 TARDIS is. And it becomes so evident when you compare the same scene with the same dialogue with different sets of lighting. Series 3 looks so much better than Series 2, and this is the perfect case study. Just look at this. Just look at it. Why is it so green? So yes, I much prefer the Runaway Bride rendition of this scene, and I also think it is abrupt and emotionally disorientating, and I do still like the scene, but most people when they watch this, they're going to be feeling a bit weird about the ending to this episode. A lot of the time when I watch people who've never watched Doctor Who before, they'll react to this for the first time, and they get to that scene, they're like, huh? Doesn't really hit how it's meant to hit. But for me personally, as someone who is never really invested in the Dr. Rose stuff, when Donna does come in, I actually like it. I think it's a cool part of the episode. I think it's a funny scene. And while it isn't on the level of anything on A or S tier, I'm going to put it safely in B. I think it's a great cliffhanger. And now we're on to Series 3, which is quickly and quietly becoming my sleeper hit for favorite Russell T Davies series. Series 4 is great. Series 1 is great. But Series 3, man, goddamn. There were some great ass episodes in this series. And also, I am the #1 Martha lover. #1 Martha fan club. I actually established the fan club. But here we are with Daleks in Manhattan, which in my opinion is the epitome of a Marmite episode, and that every time I rewatch it, my opinion changes on it. I think I love it. Right now, sometimes I've hated this episode in the past. I'm not afraid to admit it. Sometimes I've come out of these episodes and been like, what the fuck was that? And sometimes on a broader, more meta scale, I've gone back and I've seen this episode as somewhat of a misstep in that it was one of the first episodes that slightly diminished the Daleks' impact. And once you have done that with the Daleks, once you have undermined their threat, it can be hard to recoup from that. But at the same time, I don't really know. I think the Daleks are pretty well handled in this story. I think the dialogue between them is very funny. The Cult of Skar are very different types of Daleks, and the dynamic between them is great. I mean, it has some of the best Dalek lines ever. You told us to imagine, and we imagined your irrelevance. Oh my fucking god, it's so good. It is definitely the weak link in Ross T Davies' Dalek stories, and I still think it's pretty good, so what does that say? The cliffhanger itself, though, is a little strange. Dalek-Sec hybrid. Another controversial addition to the Doctor Who canon, and I can see why. It's a little weird looking. The delivery on "I am a human Dalek" is also a little weird. I'm gonna say as an episode, I love it, but as a cliffhanger, I think it is just okay. I'm gonna put it in C tier. Moving along, here we are with Human Nature, your friend or your lover, your choice. A brilliant cliffhanger, but I will confess I don't think it's on the level of anything in A tier. I'm gonna put it in B. Absolutely brilliant episode though. Do I even need to say it? I've gone over in the past why I love this one so much. I'm just saying, simply from a cliffhanger standpoint, I don't think it's just about on the level of anything in S or A tier. It's still really good though. Anything above C tier is good. But oh brother, now we are talking. Guys, you know how I said we might want to make a Z tier? Is this the best cliffhanger of all time? Okay, not of all time, but of the modern series, I don't know, is anything beating this? Utopia as an episode is a very easy 9 out of 10, at least. It's funny because Blink is right before this episode, and of course that episode is probably the most popular of Series 3. I say probably, it's like a 95% chance. And don't get me wrong, I like Blink. I've said this before, I like Blink. I think it's a good episode, but I mean, I just don't know how this one isn't the standout. Blink is like a B tier. Like, it's great episode, solid 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10. Utopia is like an S tier. This shit is masterful, and that pun was intentional. Oh my goodness, the hype around the "You Are Not Alone," the soundtrack, Martha telling Professor Yana about the watch, he flips it over, he sees it, she's like the gasp, Captain Jack's reaction, the Doctor's reaction, the rage, the fear, the fury, everything. It's so well acted, encapsulated. The episode is so good. And I've mentioned this before, but I just have to again. It's not even a scene, it's just a look. It's not even a moment, it's a look between David Tennant and Derek Jacobi. And it's funny, they've been together the whole episode, but when they look at each other just then, it's that recognition. Oh my god, both world-class actors in a world-class moment. So hype. So well conceived, and it is almost impossible to watch that and not want to watch part 2 straight away.
I need episode 12 right now.
Easiest S tier of my life. And Sound of Drums is not far behind. The musical number, the sound design of the Toclafane is so good. People don't talk about that enough. Those sounds are so goddamn good. The tearing of the sky, the end of the world. We are 3 series in, and still these are the highest stakes for the show so far. John Sim, I love John Sim. If you guys have not watched Life on Mars, you gotta get on that. But John Sim's master has kind of, it's a weird relationship. So I think he's good in the series 10 finale. I think he's absolutely unbearably terrible in End of Time. And in these episodes, I think he's perfect. Now, he is very different to the Master of old and my favorite Master personally, Roger Delgado. But for what they're trying to do, this is a reinvention of the character here. What they're trying to do is they're trying to match him with David Tennant's Doctor. He's meant to be the evil equivalent of David Tennant's Doctor. Usually, the Master is the Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock Holmes, but here it is more like a dark, twisted reflection. And that is why Derek Jacobi regenerates at the end. It's a great way to get around the fact that they can't afford to have Derek Jacobi in every episode because he is that good. Thankfully, Derek Jacobi will come back and do some expanded media stuff, some of which is impeccable. But the decision to make John Sim the Master opposed to David Tennant is a very good one. And I think in these 2 episodes, well, technically 3, even if he's only in it for 2 minutes in the other one, he is excellent. So while I do want to make it clear that this one isn't as perfect as the Utopia one, because the Utopia one is probably the best cliffhanger we've had so far, I would find it difficult to put the Sound of Drums cliffhanger at anywhere other than S tier. And let's move on to Last of the Time Lords, which of course ties into Voyage of the Damned. The cliffhanger to that one, the Doctor crashes into the Titanic. Nothing really that special, except for the fact that there is the Children in Need short Time Crash lodged in between, which I think gives this one points, and so I'm going to put it in C tier. If Time Crash did not exist, this would probably go in D tier because it's rather uninteresting, to be honest. But that nice little detail makes the world of difference. Now let's talk about some garbage. This episode sucks. It totally mishandles Martha. It totally mishandles the Sontarans. It has a really weird pacing and structure. The Sontarans in it. The performance is great, but their personality and the way they act is just antithetical to how the Sontarans are meant to act. Really, really, really weird way to introduce it. And the social messaging is just, oh my god, groan worthy. Overall, just a very lame story and a fittingly lame cliffhanger. Wilf is stuck in a car. Break the window, dude. I'm gonna put this one in D tier. I will be generous because I think the soundtrack is very good. In fact, I think the soundtrack is the only good thing that's a part of that sequence. It's just a very baffling cliffhanger. I mean, there isn't that much tension in it. I can kind of understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, I think it's probably better in execution than it is on the page. I've always found these 2 episodes very baffling. There is a great sequence. It's actually the image on the icon here where the 10th Doctor meets General Stahl. It's my favorite part of the episode, my favorite part of the 2-parter. It is a great sequence for David Tennant specifically. It's one of my favorite moments of him as the Doctor because he's just so in control of that situation. Well, that is a great scene. It is a little bit weird to introduce one of the big 3, the Sontarans, in a scene where they get totally pwned. It's just a very weird, anticlimactic, strange mishandling of a story. I think maybe I am a little biased because I just can't for the life of me understand why you bring back Martha. You guys know I love Martha. You bring her back and she's barely in it. She's in it for half of part 1. And then it's evil Martha. What the fuck was that? I've read why. Apparently they were going to have everyone be clones. There were going to be lots of clones. But instead they wanted to make it 1 clone instead to keep it unique for some reason. I mean, sure, okay, I don't want to get bogged down in it. I don't really like this episode. I do like this one though. Silence in the Library, I think, has a pretty cool cliffhanger. That Donna Noble has left the library. Donna Noble has been saved. That's a cool part. Donna's face does look very weird. It's fittingly effective. The main part of the cliffhanger for me though is the, hey, who turned out the lights? The Vashta Narada in the background chasing them. I think that's the really effective bit, and the fact that in the middle of this chase, the Doctor just stops and then it goes, very good cliffhanger. I'm gonna put it in B tier. Very good episode. I mean, all of the episodes in B tier are good. It's just the cliffhanger isn't on the same level to put it into A tier. I don't know if people are gonna agree with me, but one which I think no one could possibly disagree with me on is Turn Left, because oh my goodness, guys, if Utopia was number 1, this one is number 2. Holy shit. This episode is amazing, and when that music comes in, all the strange creatures. Donna says Bad Wolf, and then there's Bad Wolf everywhere. They run out. Bad Wolf on the TARDIS, psh. Bad Wolf on the signs, psh. And then he goes into the TARDIS, David Tennant looking at the console. Cloister bell, it's the end of the universe. Oh my god.
That's what I'm talking about. This shit means something to me, man.
I'm crying from peak fiction. S tier, goddammit. And the Stolen Earth, you guys know how much I love this one. I love it. I love this episode. And this cliffhanger too is just so well composed, and it has to get extra points for that special to be continued. God damn, is it a good cliffhanger? And I think this is a testament to how good the Stolen Earth is, in my opinion, to me. I know it's a personal thing. As a Dalek lover, this is like everything I ever wanted, right? But I think it's a testament to how much I love the episode that the cliffhanger is probably my least favorite part of it, and it still goes in S tier. You know, I am not hard to please. You just gotta put a Dalek in front of me, make it do Dalek things, and me likey. Russell T Davies, my goat. Which brings us onto the waters of Mars, which has a rather subdued cliffhanger in my opinion. This is of course the final scene with the Time Lord Victorious, the Ood showing up, and then the Doctor looking at the TARDIS and saying no. Maybe some people will argue with me on whether this should be considered a cliffhanger or not. End of Time does have a massive time jump at the start of it, but I think the ending to this episode is so effective in wanting to make you see the next one that I want to consider a cliffhanger, simply so that I can put it in A tier. The 2009 specials are really weird because they're in this part for me where I'm really nostalgic for some parts of it and really not nostalgic for other parts. For example, for this episode, I am very nostalgic for it. The Next Doctor, I'm very nostalgic for that story. But the End of Time, bros, this episode is terrible. I have never liked this episode. I am not nostalgic for this episode. When I watch it now, I still don't like this episode. And to be honest, this may sound very arrogant, but when I'm watching it, and I'm looking at like the stuff that's happening in front of me, a lot of the time I struggle to see how anyone likes this episode. And so I think it's finally time we get some use out of the E tier. The master is Obamna. But luckily, End of Time Part 2 has the best sequence in both of the episodes, which is the very end. After David Tennant has got his regeneration out of the way, the real Doctor, I mean the fraud, shows his ugly mug again, and it's an amazing sequence. The energy is electric, the music is incredible, the lines are iconic. This sequence has always been my favourite part of the episode. It's funny, I'm not nostalgic for End of Time, but I am nostalgic for that ending sequence at the end of End of Time. Make it make sense, people. So I'm going to put this one in B tier. And into the Moffat era we go. The end is in sight, people. The Time of Angels is one of my favourite stories, and one which I genuinely think is really underrated. A lot of people put this one under Blink. As I said, Blink is a fine episode. It's a fine episode. But Time of Angels is just on a whole other level. And this cliffhanger cinches it. The Doctor is pushed to his brink. River Song, Amy Pond, a gun, I am the Doctor. It is epic as hell. And it also has that historical factor because of course Graham Norton infamously interrupted the end of the episode. A tier! And onto the Hungry Earth. This one's okay. I really like the episode. I think this two-parter overall is really good. I mean, I really like all of series 5. But the cliffhanger itself is just okay. I'm gonna put it in B tier. And again, I'm kind of cheating a little bit by including Cold Blood, which the ending to this episode, while not really being a cliffhanger, is too good for me to not include. This might be one of my favorite moments in all of Doctor Who. Seriously, I remember watching this for the first time. My mind was fucking blown. The dialogue, the music, the expression, just the simple shot, the reveal of it being a piece of the TARDIS, and then you hold that up to the actual TARDIS. Bro, Stephen Moffat, you're a goddamn genius. W. Chris Chibnall 2. S tier. The Pandorica Opens has... It's really weird when you look at the first 5 series of Doctor Who in a row, because series 1 to 4 have a very natural power creep in terms of the story going along, the story unfolding, more things get added on, and it all gets a resolution at the end. And this really ties into the difference in the way that I see Doctor Who to how a lot of people see Doctor Who, which is when I see Doctor Who, I separate it into individual eras, and those individual eras almost act as their own television show, in a way. So even though Series 5 is called Series 5, internally it was called Season 1, and it definitely makes sense as a Season 1. At least in my opinion, that's how I've always viewed the changes in these eras. And even going back into Classic Who, you can really see the shifts in the show, and you can, in a way, describe them as their own versions of the television show. I think the only big shift which you wouldn't describe as a change in show is the Philip Hinchcliffe era to the Graham Williams era, because even though they are vastly different in terms of tone and style and whatever, the Fourth Doctor is the constant through line there, and you could honestly watch those episodes and not even realize that there was a change of staff behind the scenes. Whereas when you do go from the end of David Tennant to the start of Matt Smith, it would be very difficult not to notice that everything has changed. But with that said, when you go from series 1 to 5, so even past 4 and to the first series of the Moffat era, that natural power creep does continue into the Pandora Opens, which is a fittingly epic finale. But when you go into series 6 really feels more so like a series 2 of the Moffat era rather than a series 6 of Doctor Who as one continuous show, the 2005 as one continuous show. Now, of course, Doctor Who is one continuous show, but the story is technically not one ever-growing story because the story arcs, they come in peaks and valleys. They're introduced at the start of each era, and most of the time they're wrapped up at the end of each era. And so in a way, they are mini shows within a show. And I think a lot of viewers get confused when they watch Doctor Who and they don't see that as a show it ever progresses from series 1 to 7, but instead it has many resets. So it goes series 1 to 4, then 5 to 7, then 8 to 10, then 11 to 13, and then 14 to etc. And those are all like mini shows in themselves, rather than it being one continuous narrative. Does that make sense? I hope that made sense. What I'm trying to say is that the Pandora Opens is epic as hell, and probably more high stakes than even any of the Rusty Davies finales ever got to. But it would be criminal for me to not put it at least at A tier. And speaking of which, the Impossible Astronaut is gonna join it. I've talked at length before why I think this episode is perfect. It might actually be my favorite Stephen Moffat script. There are episodes in the Moffat era which I think I like more, but I've watched this one a million times and I've read the script countless times and it's just so good. And that cliffhanger, man. I actually think this might be the most underrated cliffhanger of the whole show because it is an easy contender for the top 10. It might not be able to break into my top 10, but it is definitely in the conversation. The Rebel Flesh, this cliffhanger, it kind of blows. I'll put it in D tier. But the Almost People, where it is revealed that Amy is actually at Demon's Run, I think this one's pretty good. I'm going to put this one in B tier. And the next cliffhanger is Name of the Doctor? Wow, that's a big jump. This is of course the final sequence where John Hurt is introduced as a Doctor, and I remember people being very excited about this at the time. Of course it had leaked beforehand. I think the whole season leaked. It was a very weird time, but I remember still being shocked. I don't think I'd gotten spoiled about this. I don't think it quite breaks into the A tier level, but it is certainly a B tier cliffhanger and very effective. And here we are, the end of the Fraud era. Time of the Doctor. Quite a messy story, I will be the first to admit, but this ending, man, it's my favorite scene of the episode and I think just very awesome. I've spoken to a few people about this before and the reception to the sneeze regeneration has been mixed. I think most Doctor Who fans really like it because we've already had that whole song and dance. We don't need it again. And we just want to get right into the Capaldi era. At least I remember that's how I was. I was so excited. I was so gleeful that they'd skipped the self-indulgent regeneration. We'd just got into Peter Capaldi. If you guys don't know, this is a true fact, but my number one pick in 2013 was Peter Capaldi for the Doctor. So when it was announced that he would be the Doctor, I was over the moon, and I still am because I think he was a perfect choice. And so I think this final scene in the TARDIS is definitely the highlight of the episode. A great introduction to Peter Capaldi's Doctor and a great farewell to the Fraud. Karen Gillan's inclusion is very nice. It is a repeated moment from Name of the Doctor, albeit slightly. I'll give him leeway because it still really works emotionally. I really like the symbolic removal of the bow tie. I think that's actually really effective. And as I've said before, it's got Peter Capaldi in it, man. A tier. And now we enter the weird period. And what I mean by that is before this, every single cliffhanger had the cliffhanger sting that dun 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 dun. But with the Peter Capaldi era, they decided to do it a little differently by instead flashing a to be continued, boom, and then going into the and I don't know, man. I feel like that really lessens it, at least in some episodes. I think in Dark Water it works fine because that one is meant to be a more emotional cliffhanger than an exciting cliffhanger, with the kid that Danny killed reflected in the iPad. It's a very well directed episode. The problem with Dark Water has never been that it wasn't well directed. The problem with Dark Water is that it's a very meandering, pointless and confused episode. The series 8 finale is very disjointed. The two parts episodes are not really well connected. There aren't a lot of cohesive themes. The tone of it is all over the place. Its subject matter is way too dark for Doctor Who, but the execution is so silly. And the Cyberman Brigadier, that alone is one of the most insulting things Doctor Who has ever done. But as a cliffhanger, I think this one is perfectly fine. I'm going to include the mystery reveal in it as well. The soundtrack for the mystery reveal is oddly bad.
Not good, huh?
Now, you guys know I love Murray Gold, but I have criticized him in the past for, since 2013, reusing a lot of songs a lot and not really making a lot of good new ones. And the soundtrack for the mystery reveal is just bad. It's just a bad soundtrack. The mystery reveal is also uber predictable in that I don't think anyone was shocked by it. And if you were, you clearly weren't paying attention to the rest of the episode. I mean, they said that she was a Time Lord. They said that she had 2 hearts. She's called Missy, and you already had 10 episodes to guess who it was. There is actually no way that people didn't guess it was the Master. But overall, I don't think it is as bad as the Sontaran Stratagem, the Rebel Flesh, or the End of Time Part 1, because in the case of the Rebel Flesh and the Sontaran Stratagem, those 2 ones are just a bit boring, and in the case of the End of Time, that one is just nonsensical. So I'm going to put Dark Water in C tier. The Magician's Apprentice. Now, this is one where I really want to talk about it. There is an element of Series 9 which is heavily focused on 2-parters that I think should be applauded. I think that it was in direct response to the criticism that a lot of these episodes weren't necessarily given time to develop. And so Stephen Moffat decided that for Series 9, they were going to do a lot more 2-parters. The problem is that these episodes feel like they are half of a story stretched out to reach those cliffhangers, in that The Magician's Apprentice is a story where pretty much nothing happens. The Doctor shows up in the last 15 minutes of the story. I mean, he's in it here and there, but Clara meets the Doctor when he comes out in that tank, basically 10 minutes before the end of the episode. And before that, nothing is really going on in the story. I think this is another perfect case study of why the 20-minute format is just inherently superior. Because if this story was 4 parts instead of 2 45-minute parts, and the cliffhanger to this episode was the cliffhanger to part 1, we might have actually been able to do something here. Because in theory, a lot of the stuff here should work. The problem is that there's nothing around it, and it's far too drawn out, and it's not really that interesting. I think the reveal that they're on Skaro is okay. I was never really excited by it. What I did like was the old Dalek city coming back, although that was in the trailers. But still, it's very cool. It's a cool design. I don't appreciate the clickbait of the classic Daleks being used and then just straight up not being used. I think a far more interesting story would be Peter Capaldi with Davros in the old Dalek city with the old Daleks. I think that would be a far more interesting story than whatever the hell they were trying to tell in this one. But I will be fair, let's move on to the actual cliffhanger part of the episode where Missy is killed, Clara is killed, and the Doctor begs for Clara's life. It is not emotional because I'm not super emotionally invested, but it is effective, I think, and Peter Capaldi's acting, as always, is incredible. What I don't really like is Davros's language he uses towards the Daleks, saying that they're hunting Clara, in that they're waiting for her to run because of adrenaline or something. Stephen Moffat just doesn't get the Daleks. This episode doesn't get the Daleks. That whole sequence of Clara in the Dalek casing when she's talking and then it's altering her voice or whatever. Not only is that not how the Daleks work, and it's been established that that's not how the Dalek works, because Ian in the first ever Dalek story literally gets into a Dalek and it doesn't do that. But also it's just really lame as hell and has terrible implications for what the Daleks actually are. And also I understand the metaphor they're going for here, but it just doesn't come across, and the contrast between Davros's words and what the Daleks actually look like is very goofy. But the main compelling factor of this cliffhanger is when we flash back in time to Peter Capaldi with the kid Davros, which in my opinions are the highlight of this episode, and people really exaggerate their importance in the grander scheme of things in this episode because it really is only 3 scenes over 2 parts. But either way, the shot of Peter Capaldi with the Dalek gun saying exterminate, even though it is a blatant misdirect is still definitely really effective and a cool way to end the episode. So despite me thinking the episode is very bad, I do think this one is really awful. I can see the vision, but I think it's a massive fumble. Stephen Moffat himself called it a fumble. While I do think the episode is a massive misstep, I do think the cliffhanger is effective enough. I'm going to put it in B tier. And actually, I'm going to put Under the Lake in B tier with it as well. I think this is a rather underrated cliffhanger. I always like the imagery of the ghost Peter Capaldi. I like how that happens right after the cool ends between the Doctor and Clara. I just like this episode. I especially like part 2, way more than part 1. Part 2 is doing a lot more interesting things with time and space, and is just a lot more interesting to me personally than Under the Lake, which feels like glorified setup for 45 minutes. Again, that's the problem with the structure of Series 9, is that it works really well if this was classic Who, but they're really trying to force it, the idea of, oh, we need 2-parters, when they don't really. Under the Lake is a really drawn out episode. It honestly could have been done in 20 minutes, and then we could have gotten on to Before the Flood in the next 20 minutes. And if this was a classic Who episode, we could do a lot more in 4 20-minute parts than 2 45-minute parts. People get on me, by the way, they don't understand how the structure of these things work. And in fact, even if you look at Space Babies and The Devil's Cord, those would look so much better as 2 20-minute episodes rather than 1 45-minute episodes. In fact, The Devil's Cord arguably is structured perfectly for a 20-minute episode with a cliffhanger put right in between of the Maestro coming out to chase the Doctor and Ruby. I mean, that's a cliffhanger moment right there. But I'll talk about that in a different video. I think this 2-parter is pretty good, and I think this cliffhanger is similarly great. Sadly, the girl who died is gonna have to go in F tier, because I don't even know if this can be considered a cliffhanger. It says to be continued at the end, is really unexciting. Meg. But let's move on. The Zygon invasion. The reveal that Clara is Bonnie. The shooting down of the plane. While I think this episode is so messy in its themes and ideas, this cliffhanger was pretty cool. So I'm gonna put it in B tier. And here we are, folks. Heaven Sent. Now, I think most people will agree with me that out of Heaven Sent, the cliffhanger is probably the least interesting part. The rest of the episode's great, and the cliffhanger is great too. But I will say, I think that the Doctor arriving in Gallifrey at the end and putting the sunglasses on and saying the hybrid is me is probably where a lot of people would call the low point in inverted commas in the episode. It's not really that low point. And for that reason, I won't put it in S tier, but I will put it in A tier, because I remember being very excited about this. And unlike many other people, I was not let down by Hellbent. I've always liked Hellbent. I think Hellbent is a good episode. And I think this episode ties really well into Hellbent and goes right into it. Massive W. Where can I complain? But here we are, going into Series 10, we have reverted to the regular stinger cliffhanger format. So instead of cutting to be continued, we now just go straight into the credits. And Oxygen, I feel, is a great cliffhanger, with the Doctor saying, I'm still blind, over blackness, going into the credits. I think is really effective. Now, Oxygen isn't my favorite episode, but I'll be the first to admit that I think the cliffhanger is really cool and set up something great for the future. So I'm going to put this one in B tier. And from that to an episode which I absolutely adore, Extremis Extremis, I don't know how you call it, it's so goddamn good. I have always loved this episode, and the more I go back to it, the more I find myself loving it, and that cliffhanger is awesome. I think it's really damn cool. I've briefly mentioned a few cliffhangers which I think are underrated, but I'm gonna throw a curveball here, people. I'm gonna put this one in S tier. This shit is hype as hell to me. And similarly, I'm gonna put Pyramid at the End of the World in B tier. I think it's a fine cliffhanger. The Doctor's sight has returned to him. The monks are victorious. What's gonna happen next? The Pyramid at the End of the World is a little bit of a letdown. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a bad episode like the Zygon invasion or the Magician's Apprentices, where it's just so muffled and messy in what it's trying to do. I understand everything the Pyramid at the End of the World is trying to do. It's just after going from Extremis, which is such a high, like that is an incredible episode, to Pyramid at the End of the World. The Pyramid at the End of the World is probably the lowest point of Series 10 yet. And then of course it goes into Lie of the Land, which is a sad episode because it could be so good. There are so many good parts about that episode, but it just drops the ball in the key places. But overall, yeah, even with that said, I think the cliffhanger itself is pretty effective. And I'm gonna put World Enough in Times right next to Heaven Sent. The mask reveal, while being incredibly predictable, and again, having quite a bad soundtrack. I still think it is a really effective reveal, mostly because I really like John Sim, but also because it has the added flair at the end of Bill being turned into a Cyberman. Now, what you may be noticing, as I have pointed out in many videos before, is that this is just a complete rip-off of the Dark Water cliffhanger, but my retort to that is that it is the Dark Water cliffhanger, but better. In fact, the Series 10 finale is straight up the Series 8 finale, again, if it was good. That's what that episode is. I do also like the genesis of the Cybermen line and Peter Capaldi's reaction to John Sim turning up. Mwah. He's a world-class actor, people. If you disagree, you hate it. Which brings us to the Dr. Fools, which is the meeting of the first Doctor. And while I am not too big a fan of the direction this took us for Twice Upon a Time, which I think is a meandering, pointless filler episode, I will be the first one to say that I was incredibly excited by this cliffhanger, and I'm going to put it in A tier. Twice Upon a Time features the regeneration of the 12th Doctor, which I find a little annoying because it goes on for so long and devolves into meaningless gobbledygook. But then Jodie Whittaker comes on the scene. I really like the Doctor's theme being played there and the ring falling. But outside of that, I think this is just a pretty standard cliffhanger. Am I crazy? The Doctor falls out of the TARDIS. Woo. I mean, obviously at the time, I was very excited because it was a new Doctor. But if you compare it to how bombastic the 11th Doctor's scene is and how chaotic the 12th Doctor's first scene is, the 13th Doctor's scene is a little subdued, but also just perfectly okay. I'm gonna put it in C tier. Which brings us to the home stretch, the 13th Doctor's era. The Woman Who Fell to Earth has an incredible cliffhanger. People don't talk about this one enough. The Doctor crafts this makeshift contraption out of microwaves and various other electrical appliances, and it says goodbye to Ryan, Yaz, and Graham, assuming that they are not going to come with her, except they do. And they are transported into the middle of deep space. The effect is brilliant, it looks stunning, and I remember sitting there after watching it being like, holy shit. It's a great episode, it's a great cliffhanger. I'm gonna put this one in A tier. And surprisingly, that is the only cliffhanger for Series 11. Which, I mean, when you sit back and think about it, it's not too surprising. There aren't any two-parters in that series. But it is also funny because now look at how many 13 episodes we have left. Starting with Spyfall Part 1. Now, this episode, in my opinion, is good, but not absolutely mind-bendingly amazing. It's not really on the level of episodes like Turn Left, The Stolen Earth, Utopia, Bad Wolf, or hell, I would probably say even Aliens of London. Aliens of London is an episode which I think is a sleeper hit. I would give that one like a 9 out of 10. I really love Aliens of London. And Spyfall is not on that level. If I'm being honest, I'd probably say Spyfall is like a solid B tier episode, which is good. But that ending, oh my god, I'm trying to rack my brains. I don't think I have ever been as excited watching Doctor Who as I have been for Spyfall Part 1's ending. I stood up. I physically stood up out of my chair that I was watching it in. I could not believe it. It was such an out of left field plot twist. I feel like most viewers could discern that O was a little bit shady, a little bit sketchy. But there was not even a small part of my mind that thought it was the Master. Not even a small part. And not only that, Sacha Dhawan's performance of the Master is incredible. Is electric. I mean, my petition is that when the Master comes back, it's still Sacha Dhawan, because this guy gets it. He gets the Master. If you listen to him talk about it in interviews, if you just watch the screen, this is probably the definitive version of the character as seen in New Who. Derek Jacobi's Master was very great, but only got a few brief scenes. John Sim's Master was very different to any version of the character that we've seen before, and is more envisioned as an evil David Tennant rather than a character of the Master. He's good, but he's not quite a definitive Master in my opinion. Missy is very obviously very different. In fact, in many ways, she isn't even a Master at all. She has one evil plan out of her 6 or 7 episodes that she's included in. One plan. The Master is meant to be a mastermind. In fact, she is only villainous, in inverted commas, in 2 out of the episodes that she appears in the Series 8 finale. Then in the Series 9 opener, with a 1 episode break in between, she has suddenly become relatively good. Keep in mind that at the end of Series 8, Missy performed the most horrific evil act performed by any character in Doctor Who ever, not just the Master. The Nether Sphere is the most horrific concept ever in Doctor Who, and Missy is responsible for it. Eternal torment for every human for the entirety of time. Missy is literally the devil. She literally made hell. You can't get much worse than that. And then 1 episode later, with a 1 one episode break in between, she has basically completely transformed into a nefarious river song where she makes a few jokes about Clara and pushes her down a well and tricks her into getting into a Dalek, and that's like the extent of it. And she's still like on the Doctor's side and doesn't really do anything that evil at all, or even says anything that mean. She's basically an anti-hero in that episode. And then in series 10, she spends all of it locked up until the final 2 episodes where she's basically a good guy. Missy is an incarnation of the Master in name only, and I'm not saying that Missy is bad. In fact, I think in the series 10 2-part they do some intriguing stuff with Missy's character, but I will say that she is really not the character of the Master, and I think going back to a definitive version of the character was definitely the right move, and Sacha Dhawan's incarnation is the definitive version of the Master. He is basically identical to the version of the character that was seen in Classic Who. He's got the suave, he's got the intelligence. The structure of Spyfall as a story is something straight out of season 9. I said season 9 instead of season 8 specifically there, because I feel like this is more of a plot line akin to the Time Monster than, say, Terror of the Autons. Although, of course, it is a trope that the Master teams up with an alien force that he cannot control or understand, and then it backfires, because that is literally the plot of Terror of the Autons, The Mind of Evil, The Claws of Axos, Colony in Space, and The Daemons, and The Time Monster, and The Sea Devils, and arguably Frontier in Space too. So yeah, with all that said, Sacha Dhawan is the Master. He is the definitive version of the character. He understands him inside and out, and that comes across on screen with just an incredible performance. It's actually my favourite performance in the whole Whittaker era, and I just remember being so excited by this, so much to the point where I'm gonna have to put it in S tier. If there was a Z tier, I would put this in Z tier. I'm looking at everything that's in S tier. This could be number 1. Now, I'm not saying it's number 1, but I'm saying it really could be, because this is the most excited I've ever been watching Doctor Who for a cliffhanger that I can remember. Just a marvelous moment that I will never forget, and I feel that same excitement every time I rewatch it. So let's move on to The Haunting of Villa Diodati. This episode is amazing. Very clear contender for S tier, but the cliffhanger itself is not really super exciting. The Doctor gives the lone Cyberman the Cyberium, and then we listen to a poem, and then the episode ends. And that isn't to say that the poem is bad, or that it isn't shot incredibly well, or that I don't understand the thematics of it and why it works, or to even imply for a second that it's a bad ending to an episode. It's a great ending to an episode. But in terms of cliffhangers, in terms of does this make you excited to watch the next one, is it hype? Well, I think it's a very well made moment of the show, and you definitely want to see what happens next. I wouldn't say it's the top tier level of hype that tiers A and above have, so I'm going to put it into B tier. Brilliant episode though, and joining it, I'm going to put Ascension of the Cybermen. This one has a really great cliffhanger of the Master coming through. The soundtrack in this moment especially is incredible. Lots of moving parts, lots of exciting intrigue. Ascension of the Cybermen is an episode that doesn't really get talked about enough. It's actually really good, and so I'm going to put this cliffhanger in B tier. And so here we are, The Timeless Children, everyone's favorite episode. I think the episode itself is okay. I don't really like the Timeless Child plot reveal. I think they're actually taking it in a rather interesting direction in season 1. I understand some people are like, we should just completely ignore it. If they were completely ignoring it, I wouldn't really mind. But at the same time, I really appreciate what Rusty Davies said about it. In fact, I have made multiple videos in the past giving my interpretation of The Timeless Child. I definitely disagree with the idea that it makes the Doctor Space Jesus. I definitely disagree with the idea that it's a Chosen One narrative. And in fact, I actually made a whole video, not a whole video, a whole segment of one of my videos explaining what The Timeless Child meant to me. And then I was pleasantly surprised that Rusty Davies gave an interview where he said pretty much the same thing. He mirrored my statements.
And you very much pay homage to Chris Chibnall as well with the continuation of The Timeless Child.
Absolutely. I mean, he established the fact that, I think Timeless Child doesn't mean anything to anyone, to a lot of viewers, genuinely. If you're outside the show, what does that mean? But what it does mean is the Doctor's an orphan. He's abandoned, he was adopted by the Time Lord, so you play that for the emotions. You play the fact that, I don't want to hang things off science fiction words that simply won't mean anything around the breakfast table. But if you're talking about a family, a world in which people adopt children or foster children or abandon children, then suddenly you begins to register with you. So that's our take on that, and that's going to have a lot of ammunition and fuel going forward, because of course Millie, as Ruby Sunday, she was abandoned as a foundling on the church doorstep, so you have Doctor and Companion suddenly chiming with their lives and connecting.
Russell T Davies, I know you're watching my videos. Jokes aside, I think he gets it. I agree with him 100%. This is stuff that I've been saying about the plot reveal, the plot twist, since it came out. And it's very nice to have someone who is so intelligent and writing the show come to the same conclusions as me and take the story in the same direction that I would going forward. Because of course, if I was in charge, I wouldn't undo any of this shit. Because it has been done, it would be kind of disrespectful to immediately retcon it. Retcons are best done when it's like 6 years on from the fact, you know what I'm saying? And also, if you really want to retcon it, there's that Toymaker line where he says, I made a puzzle out of your past, did you like it? And I think that is also another perfectly adequate way of washing it away if you decide to do so. I mean, it's headcanons at the end of the day, right, people? Either way, while I am not the biggest fan of the Timeless Child plot reveal, in fact, I think it's just a little bit silly, I am also fine with the direction that they are taking it in. That being said, the cliffhanger to the Timeless Children is pretty lame. The Doctor goes to space prison. The space prison kind of looks like Sharda. The Jadoon can teleport inside the TARDIS for some reason. And I actually think the episode would have worked better on the more melancholy note that we were headed towards before the Jadoon randomly showed up. And so for that, I'm going to put it in D tier. And for Flux, I'm going to do a quick fire round because there are just so many and I can't talk about all of them the same level. The Halloween Apocalypse, I'm going to put in B tier. It's a very cool cliffhanger. I've always really liked it. The music is really great here too. And I really like the visual of the camera tumbling out of the TARDIS. War of the Sontarans, this cliffhanger is A tier. The snapping of the fingers just as the music comes in. Swarm and Azure and Passenger are all threatening and awesome. It's just a great cliffhanger. And Flux Part 3 as well. The Weeping Angel piloting the TARDIS. I'm going to put that one in B tier. It's not really a standout for me, but I remember actually being really excited about this when it did happen. I'm going to skip over Village of Angels just so I can talk about Flux Part 5. I think this cliffhanger is okay. I'm going to put it in C tier. Swarm and Azure show up. The Grand Serpent is in charge of UNIT. Just pretty standard. And the Village of Angels, this one to me is the standout of Flux. I remember even people who didn't really like the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who coming out and saying that this episode was a banger, because it was, but also because this cliffhanger was so exhilarating and intriguing and awesome. The visuals of the Doctor transforming into a weeping angel are just so awesome. It is a very cool cliffhanger, and for that reason I'm going to put it in A tier. And wow, 3 episodes left. Can we do it, guys? Power of the Doctor, in my opinion, is the modern retelling of the 5 Doctors. It is similar in many aspects, the main one being that there aren't actually 5 Doctors in either. It is just such a joy to watch. It is one of my favourite episodes of the modern era, and I just adore that regeneration scene. Although I will say the 14th Doctor being David Tennant is something that I didn't really like at the start and is still kind of aging like milk. The reveal that David Tennant was the 14th Doctor and how that set the internet alight, it would be crazy for me not to put it in A tier for that. It was a moment in history. I remember the hype and a wonderful way to end the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who. Which leads us on to the Star Beast, which ends with Donna spilling her tea on the TARDIS console, but for the sake of this I will also include the scene where Donna and the Doctor first enter the new TARDIS. Now I've seen a few people kind of turning on the new TARDIS set, which is inevitable. New thing bad after all. I personally love it. I also like the last TARDIS and the last TARDIS and the one before that, and I like this one a lot. I think it's really cool. I think the interactive lighting does a lot as well, and the scene where the Doctor first enters it and runs around and then shares that moment of joy with Donna is probably my favourite moment of the Star Beast. And so for that, this might be controversial. I'm gonna put it in B tier. I was gonna put it in A tier, but then I was looking at some of the other episodes in A tier and I was like, it's good, but it's not that good. In fact, looking at some of the episodes that are in B tier, I'm actually gonna move this one down here because this is a cool cliffhanger, but it's not on the level of any of these. Even Pyramid at the End of the World, which is probably the second lowest in B tier. But the Star Beast, yeah, that was a pretty good episode and a brilliant cliffhanger, which takes us to the final episode. While Blue Yonder ends with the final scene of Bernard Cribbins, it is a joy to behold. Rather emotional too, and in my opinion, just spectacular. Maybe not the most hype of cliffhangers, but one that really hits close to my heart. The precursor to the giggle is pretty nice as well, but that isn't the really main important thing. There is maybe an abrupt cut to the credits. There's that breathy credits that's just a little bit weird, but those are all nitpicks. I think this may be controversial, but I think just for Wilf's inclusion, I'm gonna put this one in A tier. Which brings us to the conclusion of the list. Let's look. Let's overview, folks. Is there anything that I would change or not? Okay, so I'm looking at the list. The only thing which I think I might want to change is move the empty child up to S tier. That might be the only thing that I want to change. I'm pretty certain with all this. You guys know this. My tier lists are subject to change basically from the moment that I put them out. I watch Doctor Who so much, my opinions on the matter are constantly changing. And honestly speaking here, the only cliffhanger which I think is actually pretty bad is probably the girl who died. That's probably the only one where I'm like, does this even count as a cliffhanger? Even the End of Time Part 1 is completely ridiculous, but at least it's entertaining in its ridiculousness to the point where you're like, what the hell is gonna happen next? To be honest, I should probably move the Timeless Children down here. In fact, I'm going to, just for symmetry. The list isn't fucking symmetrical anyway. If I wanted to make the list symmetrical, I'd do that. You know, just for the sake of symmetry, I'ma do that. So what do you all think? What do you think of the list? What do you think of cliffhangers in general? If you've gotten to this part of the video, drop your top 5 favorite cliffhangers in the comment section below. And thanks for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. And if you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And also leave a comment below detailing your thoughts on all the Doctor Who cliffhangers. The community reaction video is coming soon. Don't you worry, folks. And I can't wait for Series 14, Episode 3. It's gonna be a banger, guys. Pun definitely intended. And if you want to help support the channel, you can click the join button below to gain access to a billion perks and benefits, including access to the Discord server, reactions to the latest Doctor Who episodes as they come out, and access to the new weekly members only series where I go over all my thoughts on every episode that I watched within the week. A massive shout out to the king, Kyle Reese, and thank you to the members: Just Him, Teddy Bite, Andrea Lee, Kustretch, Zach Pollock, Ertle the Turtle, Casual Log, Colin Savage, Tom, Oz Baxter, Manny, Someone's Best Friend, Connor Bell, Eric is Waiting, Snurly, KCKC, Doctor of Transport, Poison Cupcake, Flippant, Rouge Argentine, James Holly, Dr. Skelly, Eve, Jeanette, Ponga, Exception, 6th Doctor Fan 84, and Kyle Reese. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.